Hello, all you Precipites out there in podcast land. This is Alex Eldridge, bringing you our part 2 deep dive into how we are preparing to launch for publication. This episode, not unlike the last one, actually was recorded quite a while ago in August, so it is a little bit dated, specifically our reference to Hilary Mantel, who has sadly passed on now. There's a lot of really good information in here, just in terms of the genesis of some of the stories and how we came up with them and how we found the editing process going through them. I'm actually not appearing on this one myself, but just wanted to put this little addendum to let you know that this did happen a while ago, and we are going to have a final part as to where we are now, right before we hit the button on release date. But yeah, I'm really excited for you to hear it, so hopefully you enjoy it.
Welcome to Prose Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Welcome to the Pros and Cons podcast, and today we have a bit more of an intimate subject going on. We're going to be talking about ourselves. Today with me I have James.
Hello.
Paddy.
Hi.
And Ali.
Hello.
So lovely to see you guys. Before we get into this more personal topic, I'd love to hear what have you guys been reading, listening to, watching recently.
I've been listening to Memoirs of a Geisha on YouTube.
Nice.
It's really good. Unfortunately, it only goes up to like chapter 29 and then it just stops. So it turned out it was a fan-made reading. The person who did it did a great job. She did it really well. But about 4 years ago, she just stopped and never finished the story.
God.
I have now finished, as far as I'm concerned, I finished Memoirs of a Geisha. I just made sense of all of the themes up until the point where I've gotten. So that's just what that story is to me now. I may never read the ending.
I had the same thing with Three Body Problem the first time I started to listen to it.
Oh, no.
I didn't know it was a fan-made thing. It was so good, and I was so gripped, and then it just ended.
Yeah.
It hurt so much.
It was like, oh, okay, that's what that is then.
Yeah.
So you're not going to pursue the ending of the. You're not going to try to find out what happened.
I definitely will. I'll probably just go into a library and read it some evening. But at the moment, I've just got this really bleak understanding of what the story is.
You're expecting it to get happy.
Yeah, I'm hoping I'll go in and read the ending in the library and it'll everything will get better, but it might not. It might get worse.
I want you to live with that hope.
Yeah. Maybe keeping this ending, but with the hope that things will get better might be better than actually finding out how it does end.
Well, maybe it's meant to be. Maybe that's your version of the geisha's memories, and that's fine.
I can jump in. I've actually been doing a lot of consuming lately. I finished Jade City,
What's Jade City?
It's a book written by will I get her name fast enough? Fonda Lee. It is the first in a series, and I enjoyed the first one. I haven't seeked out the second straight away. Maybe I'll do read a few other books before I go back and finish the series. But I quite enjoyed it. It was a lot of martial arts, really interesting characters. I can't talk about the plot too deeply because it's very spoilerific. So I feel like the moment I try and say I liked this element, it's a spoiler straight away. But yeah, a very plot heavy, really good characters, martial arts, cool, Godfather-esque, but like Hong Kong street crime vibes, all rolled into one. So yeah, good book. And then I've gone sideways to Terry Pratchett and currently listening to Mort. Haven't listened to that Terry Pratchett one yet, so it's much lighter and it's really nice. I find Terry Pratchett just such good soul food. It's so witty that at least when I'm listening to the audiobook, I'm just grinning like an idiot at all these very witty lines, and yeah, it just carries you along on the whimsy. So Pratchett's good for that.
It's funny that Mort would be the one that's the lightest of the series.
Yeah, he's me being like, it's so funny and light and whimsy, and I'm talking about Mort.
That's just the nature of death in Pratchett books, I guess. He's a hell of a guy. I'm reading Wolf Hall for everyone listening. I'm
Aha!
holding up
Yay!
this book. Woo! Oh my god. I think I found my favorite book. I honestly do. I think this is the best thing I've ever read.
Does
in
everyone
my
have
life.
their copy within reaching distance?
Hold it up.
I have to start soon.
Wait.
Yay! I've got the same as Matan.
This is gonna be the still for the episode thumbnail.
Yeah,
then,
for sure.
on the YouTube.
Hillary, if you ever watch this or listen, we're not asking for money, but if you want to send something our way, we would not object.
Or if we could just interview.
By the way,
you.
you're great.
She really is.
Look, she's great. She's fantastic. She's really good.
I don't know
But
if it was
Patty, please summarize for people who have never heard about it.
Wolf Hall is historical fiction set in the days of King Henry VIII and his many wives, the adventures of Henry. It's actually about the historical figure Thomas Cromwell, who was a lawyer in King Henry's court, and among other things, presided over his right to divorce and kind of England forming the historical Church of England. Now, Ali was saying, and I had read a little bit, that Hilary Mantel took a few liberties with the character of Thomas Cromwell. Historically, he is considered by some to be a bit of a monster. In the books, he's very, would you say he's lovable? I'd say he's lovable.
Yeah, you develop the softest spot for him.
Yeah.
It's amazing what she manages to do. You're on board the entire way, and you understand exactly why he's making every decision. And you're like, if I was in that position, I would do that too. Yeah, it's incredible empathy.
It is.
But I gotta say, as someone who I'm very familiar with English history, but that particular time, like Thomas Cromwell, was kind of a blind spot for me. So walking into this knowing nothing about the guy, I'm pretty sure that's a very different experience than people who got to see him portrayed in other TV shows and media and books. And I'm really looking forward to seeing a more generic portrayal and kind of comparing the two.
Yeah, me too.
Seeing how she did it different.
When I'm done this, I really want to go down some historical rabbit holes and find out what the historical consensus on the man was. It also opens up that whole interesting conversation about to what extent does historical fiction have a responsibility to portray history with dead-on accuracy?
Yeah, I'm sitting here grinning like an idiot. Yeah.
You're not taking a character and like fundamentally changing whether they were a good or bad
she's
person.
She's taking a pirate, a criminal, and she's making us sympathetic to him. You know, she's making us care about him.
But he stole the boat because it's important.
According to Ali. According to Ali.
God damn it, Ali, you've done it as well.
Patty may have successfully drunk the Kool-Aid that I put down on the paper.
I did.
I imagine there is room for if you're on the British side of William's actions, being like he marooned 30 men. There was a woman with young toddlers with them.
He did do that, didn't he?
And they had to walk through Tasmanian wilderness for 2 weeks to get back to Hobart Town. They nearly perished because they had water supplies and
there were still Tasmanian devils at the time.
The Tasmanian devils.
And also
they weren't extinct yet.
Indigenous Australians are also worth mentioning. We're also would have been hostile towards that particular party trekking through the wilderness as well. So a very unsafe situation. People died as and then what he ends up doing to the people who actually get hung. Yeah, so no, there's a lot of grey room for where William's actions can be interpreted, but the art of the historical fiction, as you said, Patty, is making sure the audience is on board with the protagonist and being like, he had his reasons. He was the only thing he could do.
Or is it that they should tell the truth? Look, either way, I enjoyed your historical fiction very much. And Wolf Hall is absolutely magnificent. We were talking in the chat before, I don't know if it was Matan, you brought it up, or Ali, you brought it up, that Ali is a really big like plot person who loves like plot and really nerds out on that. Matan character, and I with prose. And we all love Wolf Hall individually for those three things just being like such great examples. She is masterful. And she has some real idiosyncrasies with her writing as well, which like saying he all the time instead of ever specifying who she's talking about. And for me, it actually doesn't matter. And that you just know who she's talking about anyway. The kind of thing that if we were editing each other's work, we'd like say like, no, that's wrong. You need to say who you're talking about. But Mantel just does it.
Look, she
you were
writes
telling
the
me
way
about that
she
before, and that
writes.
sounds pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Look, we could sit here for 3 hours just gushing about Wolf Hall, and that would be 3 hours well spent. With that being said, I will just quickly say that what I'm reading is Bring the Bodies Up. Bring Up the Bodies.
Yep.
Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel. And it's equally great. And honestly, I could not recommend it enough. It is a bit different, like Patty said. It's written in the present tense, a lot of he's instead of the name, but it really does work. Highly, highly recommended. And in a complete segue, or is it a complete if it's a segue? Anyway, directly moving from this, I wanted to explain what we're going to talk about. Today, we're going to do a bit of a recap of the anthology, how it's been going, what we've been up to. And mostly, I'd like to give these guys a chance to tell you what the story was about and share their experience writing for an anthology. Most of us for the first time. Ali, I believe this is your second time joining forces with a bunch of writers. And let's see how it was. So I'll just float this question in the air. Was it different for you guys to write knowing that your short story is going to be part of a bigger whole? Did it affect the type of stories you came up with at all, or was it something you were indifferent to?
I'll go first. I'll say no to character plot or themes. I was definitely very set. I knew very early on the story I wanted to tell. I think I ended up pitching the anthology off the back of and wanting an excuse to write this story. But what it did affect was word count. I've always been a long form writer. I plot TV shows. My books are always way bigger than they need to be. And as a surprise to no one, my short stories are way longer than they need to be. I haven't quite mastered the art of the short story. So I did my best with this one, but I think
you pruned it down significantly.
The
finished version is much closer to.
There's a director cut.
But it's not necessarily better though. I'm glad it did have to go through its pruning process. I don't know, what was it, 16K the first draft I submitted, and then it got chipped down to about 12K.
Although everyone else has moved up to about 9K from around 7.5, I think. So the gap just shortened.
So where everyone else had additive edits, I was there with my hedge trimmers out, constantly trying to get this thing down. So that was a self-implied pressure, not necessarily from the group, but I did feel a responsibility to be like, this can't be a massive waffling exercise. This needs to be a short story that's sharing equal weight with all the other short stories in the anthology. So there was a responsibility to be as tight as possible and get it down as much as I can, and yet still have it function as a story.
I'm going to ask you for a summary real soon. I just wanted to ask, before I ask you to give a quick summary of your story, did you feel like when the story evolved in your head, okay, did it feel like the fact that you read other stories and you thought, this story is like this story is like that, I want my story to stand out? Like, let's say you're writing a really scary story and then you see 3 other stories are kind of scary. Do I want my story to be a bit more distinguished? Did that affect in any way your plot, characters, that kind of stuff, or it didn't bleed into that?
I would say for mine, no. I had actually written Cooling Engines before I joined into the group with the anthology. So it didn't really affect too much of how that story, I guess the main components of that story. It was more in responding to the feedback. There was a couple of times when I was kind of left with a decision of, if I go down this route, it may be a better story technically. Whereas if I go down this route, it might be a bit more of an original, a bit more of a niche kind of thing, which I would often probably ordinarily lean into if I was writing a story for myself. But the fact that I was thinking that this would be part of a collective and our audience might be a bit of a more, we'd all probably be drawing in different circles from the audience. I did respond to some of the feedback and think I might make a few decisions to maybe soften out some of the more niche stuff to make it a bit more of a technically better story. As a result of that, the word count jumped from 7,000 up to nearly 9,500. And then because it's wanted to be quite a fast-paced story, I cut that back down to about 7,000 in the final draft.
I want to touch on a really interesting point. So James and Patty, both of you had the stories ready before we even conceived
Well
this
remembered.
anthology.
Well remembered.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Um,
It's like you've been paying attention.
Was it an easy decision? Like when Ali had her Tony Stark moment assembling us, did you guys immediately know, oh, that's the story I'm doing? Or
James, you want to take this?
Yeah, I actually think that we might have kind of similar answers for this, Paddy, because I know Cooling Engines was intended, it was originally written to be chapter 1 of a novel, which never got finished. And then the redrafting of it, I was kind of thinking, oh, you know what, I've actually done a lot of setting up of things, which were going to be explored later on in a story, which ended up not being explored in the context of just a short story. So I had to rewrite a lot of that to think of it as just a contained story. I initially didn't think I was going to use Cooling Engines. I was actually sat down and considered writing something else for it, but the story didn't really come together. That's still sitting in kind of like redrafting hell. So Cooling Engines was my backup, as it was a story that I was pretty happy with and something that was quite polished, and something which is like part of a larger idea that I wanted to start getting the groundwork out and start pushing bits of it out here and there.
Mm-hmm.
Same. And now you might be the same, a little concerned about when we publish, where does that leave my story legally for being able to be written into a larger work. So my story, I wrote it for a few different reasons, partly because I mentioned this a few times, I was building a board/card game at the time. Me being me, the lore got a little out of hand until it became this whole sprawling story that I was never going to be able to tell in like a board/card game. So it became its own thing. At some point, this story was maybe going to be the beginning of a book, maybe standalone. But now, or rather once we do publish, I don't know if I'll be able to use it as a beginning of a book, because it might be, this just shows my ignorance about publishing, but like locked legally into the published format it's in and not be allowed to be republished in a different format as part of a longer story.
I do think that is the case. I think if you publish it
in
one place, you can't republish it. Like, because if you publish it as part of a book, it'll probably be with a different publishing house or publishing company.
I do have to bring up a case in which just this was done. A chapter of a novel was published as the winner of a competition, and later on as part of a novel, and that is the case with The Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss. A chapter of it won the Writers of the Future competition. We're talking about a 17,000 word part. That's a very significant chunk that has been published, that has been read by readers all over, and later on still published as part of the novel. The reason for that is that the Writers of the Future specifically, while publishing your work, let you retain the rights for it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Amazon might not be quite so merciful.
Fair enough, but that's the thing. I do believe we can get around that because Ali's story, my story, they're all heavily linked to bigger works, to the point that even certain characters appear in multiple works. But yeah, leave that to the legal team. I'm sure we're gonna.
Yeah, no, the exact word. However we end up whether through is Amazon. So if it's exact word reproduction, that's what we need to be careful about. But in terms of IP, it's us. Precipice own the IP. So it's, unless Precipice wants to sue Paddy for going away and using his trader things
Please
later.
Please don't. But it's not at the themes, it was the story itself. Like the traitor was going to be.
You're talking about the prose itself.
Yep, the prose.
So yeah, that's what we need to check with whatever our distribution stream is. But in terms of the IP, Precipice is the IP. We're the IP holders. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm not concerned about that. And it is what it is. If this is locked in, it's locked in. Like, we're writers, we can write new stuff.
That's kind of my attitude with Cooling Engines. I've decided to kickstart that. But if I ever get back to it, I'm just going to kickstart it a different way from a different character's POV.
Yeah, absolutely. And, keep the same characters and stuff like that in different parts of the story. Definitely keep the same characters in yours, James.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I will.
The one character is very good.
Yeah. Oh, he's pretty central to the whole idea.
I'm pretty sure if we start suing each other, that's really good publicity. So we might even get on the news. Six-way lawsuit just erupted in.
We could do that thing that hip hop artists do, where we pretend to have these massive beefs with each other, but actually we're just kind of friendly and we're orchestrating the whole thing, the whole thing behind each other's backs, behind the audience's back.
I love that.
That does sound like a very specific Patty and James problem, though, because I believe everyone else from the group. So the impetus was always, we have larger worlds, we're working on larger stories, our own individual larger IP, but we want to contribute a short story of these larger worlds to this anthology. So I believe the other 4 members of the group went away and wrote a self-contained something that wasn't necessarily already part of our wider work. Our wider work is existing elsewhere.
I was really impressed with everyone's ability to sit down and write their short stories within like the time frame, and then be like, finished. And I was just like, oh, it's not even the first draft.
It's like these cooking shows where, instead of cooking the pie, they suddenly take out a ready-made pie from a different part of the room. And like, you were supposed to put that in the oven. No, I made it yesterday. Don't worry about it.
Everyone was like, James, have you finished your story? And I just like slid it off the table and then put Cooling Engines out and was like, yes.
Now that I think about it, I think Alex's story, Town Hall Steps, might also have been a pre-written thing. I think it might be the first long-form thing he ever wrote. Now that I think about it,
I think he did say that. Yeah.
So we've all just.
I don't want to make any declarations on behalf of Alex, but I feel like all of his short stories kind of have this Stephen King connectivity, in which they happen in the same universe. But
that's what he says, but I'm very curious as to how he's going to tie that together.
King's got an entire town eaten by vampires. Sorry for the spoilers. And the rest of the world just keeps going. And they just kind of mumble that, don't go to that town. Something's all happening in there.
It was like thematically relevant to the idea of like the small towns dying, basically, because of capitalism and because of stuff. And it was, people were just kind of like, oh, they just let that happen to this small town, and they sort of just ignore that it's happening. So it's just like, he just made a slight shift that it was happening because of vampires. Not that I'm not trying to defend Stephen King. I just love Salem's Lot.
So while we're talking about our stories, I don't believe we've done this yet, but I'd love it if you guys could just summarize a couple of sentences what your story is about. And if it is related to a bigger world, I'd love to hear it. Like if it's at the beginning of a book or that kind of stuff. I'll start. All right, I'll go first.
Brave.
Everyone's just trying to formulate it in their head.
Okay, I'll go first. I'll be the guinea pig. I'll butcher my story. Okay. Right. My story is called Glyphlight, and in a nutshell, it is the story of 2 young siblings whose father had gone missing in the town's mine. They go to find him and are unsuccessful. But while they're looking for him, the girl, who is a bit more in tune with the more mystical parts of the world, hears something that scares the bejesus out of her, and the story goes on from there. They meet a person that allegedly can help them find their father inside the dark, scary mine, and that's the setting for the story. So the story relates to a novel that I'm working on, which is called Absolution. Same setting, not necessarily the same characters, but that's a little sneak peek into the novel that I like to give the readers.
It's very gothic horror in parts.
And it is technically a prequel.
it is a prequel, but it is said before. But yeah, it is a prequel. Yeah, it's nothing.
Mine's very similar, and it was funny when you launched into your first couple of sentences. I'm like, Stolen Sword sounds exactly the same. So the Stolen Sword is the story of two siblings.
It's an archetype. It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like Rick and Morty, two brothers.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah, all right, I'll have a go at mine. So he has two young siblings. The world they're in, they're kind of fleeing their war-torn kingdom, and we just have the context that the older sibling has a valuable artifact with them, and these are two siblings that have been struggling to, somewhere to sleep, food, shelter. So the plan is they're going to sell this rare artifact to be able to live in wealth for the rest of their lives. And with 13-year-old logic, the older sibling is like, who has the most money in the empire? The emperor does. So we're going to sell the rare artifact to the emperor, and we're going to get lots and lots of coin that way. The story that unfolds is these two siblings getting caught up in the machinations of kind of what is the royal court. The emperor has some hidden agendas. So when this child who has some unique magical abilities in the world falls into his lap, he wants to use this child. He can use him as a bit of a political pawn, take him as an apprentice. And so this young boy is kind of conflicted with, who is he loyal to? The emperor, who's taken them in, given them clothes and wealth, but is ultimately responsible for the war-torn land and massacre they just fled. And it's just all about who to trust, betrayal, and yeah, that's kind of what's centering on this little short story.
And it also relates to the world you've crafted for a novel.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is set roughly 15 years. No, it's got to be a little bit more than that. It's got to be around the 20-year mark. Anyway, it maybe a good 2 decades before the start of Majesty. I think I've mentioned Majesty quite a few times on the podcast. Majesty is a manuscript that in 2020 I got a Varuna residency for to work on. So I've kind of been not shopping it around, but I've been submitting it into unpublished manuscript competitions to try and get some momentum with it. But basically the main character of Majesty is then the apprentice of the main character in The Stolen Sword. So it is this lineage of apprentices that gets so I'm having fun with that because the whole world is based around master-apprentice relationships.
But that's what I really like about your story, because I read the novel, and having read the novel, the fact that your short story is set only 20 years before, with so many relevant things happening that are directly relevant to the novel, it's just a pleasure, because it's like all these talks about all the Game of Thrones prequels. People want to know what happened with Ned Stark when he was 15. People are interested in that. And I just find it really fascinating that for some readers, it will actually be the opposite process. First, they might meet these characters that were initially meant to be experienced in their older age, and later on.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting for me as well, obviously, having written the major work first, and then in my head, I'm like, let's now go and expand and revisit Cal as a kid, while people are going to be reading Cal first. And then getting adult Calcifer in the main series is going to be, reverse experience. So I'm not sure how that's going to read, actually.
Exactly. Do you think some people are going to be like pissed off, like The Last Jedi, Luke Skywalker? What do you mean he's old and he doesn't care about anything?
What do you mean he's the villain? Yeah.
They're going to get invested in this kid, and suddenly he's no spoilers, but it's kind of a...
I haven't seen it.
Got some
I haven't
morally
seen it.
great
I haven't seen it.
decisions.
I didn't know he was the villain even. It's okay. I know I'm past my statute of limitations. I'll say it eventually. You can say what you want.
It could create that element of this was him as a kid and this was him as an adult, and what happened in between.
And then I'll have to write another
Yeah.
short story. Yeah, no,
You'll have
it's
to write it,
excellent.
yeah.
Yeah.
It'll have like
Absolutely.
it'll be the Jesus Christ paradox. So it's like we have this part of his life and this part of his life, and then we're missing this whole middle section, which would explain so much.
Yeah.
I actually didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
all the missing scrolls of teenage Jesus Christ, the wild
Right,
years.
of course, yeah.
Where he beat up a fig tree or something. Hates fig trees.
Just don't sell the property to Disney, because they're just gonna have this spin-off called Calcifer about him being 25, having his heart broken. You know, that kind of cheesy stuff.
I actually still talking about Jesus at that point. Don't sell the Jesus property to Disney. Also probably true.
Jesus, but Disney. It's okay. Maybe we should stay away from that topic.
Don't give them ideas.
But thank you, Matan, for the lovely compliment, because I guess in my head, Stolen Sword was the opportunity to like sneak in a lot of Easter eggs, and it was for pretty much an audience of one. I feel like you're the only one who would be able to read Stolen Sword and pick up on exactly how many Easter eggs I shoehorned into that, like how many of the characters do appear in the main one and what the implications are. And I'm pretty sure there's Easter eggs in there that are relevant to the books I haven't even read yet. So yeah, that's the kind, because I'm a massive Brandon Sanderson fan, I'm like, how many small hints about the future can I force into this one thing? So I'm trying to steep it with as much of that hidden context as possible, because I have nothing better to do, apparently.
Well, thank you very much, Ali. I was really looking forward to seeing how people react to reading things in the opposite direction. Patty, what can you tell us about your lovely story? Is it the first thing from you that I ever read?
Yeah. We're all part of a writing group. This is the first thing I brought to the writing group. This was actually the first finished story I ever wrote. Desert setting, and there are these tribes that they're all sort of sitting on the ruins of a very, very technologically advanced society, and basically it's like a mishmash of like low and high tech that we see in like a lot of sci-fi and fantasy. I'm going to say sci-fantasy. So they'll use like spears and swords and weapons and stuff while doing boarding actions on like these great lumbering engines that travel across the desert. My story is a conflict between one particularly warlike tribe called the Thousand Spears, who are kind of Spartan in they're like Spartans. They're militaristic. They're trained from childhood to be these brutal savage warriors. They're obsessed with personal honor and martial status. And this other tribe called Dust Flag, who are basically merchants, traders, artisans. They're the peaceful kind. This story follows the very beginning of the eruption of a conflict between Thousand Spears and Dust Flag. This Dust Flag tribe is in this thing called a sand ship, which is like this vast engine of the desert that slowly crawls across the land, trading from city to city. And the story focuses on this Thousand Spears team of like assassin infiltrators who board the sand ship, start to kill people. Basically, their objective is to take control of it. Kind of having my cake and eating it too with themes. I really, I'm war is bad. I'm more or less a pacifist. I don't want to like glorify violence and war, but at the same time, it's so fun to write about and read about. So the story gets very violent at one point, but I also want to highlight ultimately like the horror of conflict and the horror of violence, which I don't know, maybe I pull off, maybe I don't. I'm rambling now. I hate talking about my stuff so much. I really do. It's just the worst. That's it. That's my story. It's in the anthology.
That was a good spiel.
It was. I just got to say, and I'll probably say the same thing about James's story, but what really made me fall in love with your story is, honestly, the prose right from the get-go is different, and it is confidently different. You start with a beautiful first line that says so much, and the way you continue with the story and you describe it to me, you kind of take me into this world. And this world, make no mistake, is a dystopia. It's like a post-apocalyptic, but it feels so post-apocalyptic, like the smoke from the bombs has subsided so long ago that something new now settled in, and we got like these people had time to have a new mythology, a new history, a new civilization after everything else was kind of wiped away. And that's the way I interpret it.
Yeah, that's it. Cool.
And it gives me this feeling like even after everything kind of went to shit, if you give people enough time, they will come up with new gods, new cultures, new things. And I think that's one of the attractive things about the world you created.
Thank you.
And the prose really, really helps make you feel like you're somewhere else, not just the descriptions, but the way you wrote it.
Thank you. I appreciate
and
that.
The lizards are great.
I appreciate that. And so do the lizards. I was playing, I won't hop on for too much longer, but a very, very good video game called Caves of Cud, spelled Qud, while I was writing this. And the game is set in, it's like not 1,000 years in the future, but eons and eons in the future, to the point where as you go down the strata underground, you go to like one epoch with their own technology and culture, and you can see their ruins, and then another epoch with their own technology and culture, and you can see their ruins. And in this like earth of millions of years, all the different cultures and technology levels and stuff sort of blend together to the point where the very, very old technology has become basically like magic. Like it's a fantasy world filled with magic, but
I love it.
Yeah. And that stuff, I absolutely love that concept.
And it's a completely different, it's a very different approach than what I usually read, because I usually read the more traditional fantasy where magic is magic. And my sci-fi is sci-fi, and you kind of took the two, and I'm not sure what's happening.
It's a fun concept to play with. Yeah. Anyway, that's me done. I'm done. That's it. Sorry.
Okay, dismissed.
Thank you.
James, you're next up. Tell us everything about everything.
So Cooling Engines is my story, and it essentially follows a convoy of vehicles traveling across a post-apocalyptic, war-torn America. The story centers in on one particular character at one particular point where the convoy has traveled into heavy fog up in the mountains, and they've had to come to a standstill essentially and try to figure out if they can continue along this road, or if they have to figure out a new route. The story is from the point of view of the convoy's navigator, who is essentially feels like he's going to be held accountable for this, because the convoys tend to turn on one another whenever the chips are down and sort of like blame each other. And they all have their own, the convoy is divided into different divisions, and each of the divisions has their own kind of inner network and their own inner agendas that will put them in conflict with one another. So the story is essentially quite a claustrophobic, paranoid, hopefully, tense story of a character sitting in a camper van trying to figure out how he's going to get himself out of this, how he's going to get the convoy out of this, and the different, I suppose, tight wires that he has to walk and obstacles he has to overcome in order to do this. So that's essentially that story. And yeah, I'm hoping that it is going to be fairly tense and fairly fast-paced. And the idea came from a larger story that I've been working on, which was sort of about basically a post-apocalyptic event having occurred following a virus, basically, that kind of destabilized society. And society then sort of broke off into all these different small settlements or colonies. And as it began to rebuild, trade routes began to pick up once again between the different places that people lived in, and people began living long term in these convoys, ferrying people and supplies and stuff back and forth between them. So the story was supposed to follow one of these convoys, and basically the massive obstacle that they give themselves of just getting from A to B because of all of the lack of real teamwork and real everyone just kind of getting on the same page and working together, making a difficult process, an almost impossible process to actually be performed properly. Yeah, so that's that idea.
So I've said before, and I'll say again, that I love Cooling Engines. I really, really like it as a story, and it does this. I don't know how. Like, is a logistical thriller a thing? It totally is. I don't know how some authors make
wow
but it is like logistics, and like, do we have enough food for this number of miles? Well, but we might run out at this point, and then this faction will turn on this faction. I love that shit so much. You do it so well.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really tense and really gritty and really like the number of batteries would matter a lot. That is actually a really big deal.
That is something that for me in writing any kind of story like that, I can't get that out of my head.
Yeah,
I'm like, I know that they have horses. I know they have to get from A to B. What are they going to feed the horses? That's what's the thing that's in my head. And that's the thing that if you understand it well enough, you only have to drop it into the story a little bit to make it seem more realistic, but also to create conflict out of what is essentially, oops, we dropped the bales of hay and now we don't have enough food for all the horses. So half of you are going to have to stay here.
Like the basic material in a story is something that you could gloss over it and ignore it, fine. Or you could make it a central part, and it's actually like very, very important and very real. Yeah, it feels very real.
And when it comes down to survival, it is almost those mundane details. Like, did you keep the sticks for your firewood dry, or did they get wet?
I really think we can all give a glowing endorsement to Colin Engines. Personally, I thought it had one of the best flashback scenes I've read in a long time. Absolutely horrifying and harrowing, and just, again, I know I said it about Patty, but the prose in James's story just really sings. You gotta read it to realize what I'm talking about, but specifically the flashback scenes. It's almost like you kind of zoom in a bit too much, and you get a bit closer than you usually are when you read something. Like you get invited to see like the understandings, for lack of a better word, the insights of a specific situation that many of us may not view in that way normally, because let's be honest, war today is kind of sexy, right? Explosions, laser beams,
has been made
violence
to be so,
violence is sexy. I mean, you got it in movies. Sometimes it is horrifying, but a lot of the time, punching someone, shooting someone, it's cool, right? Stabbing someone. And James's, that specific flashback really made me feel like, what a disgusting, horrifying situation. War
Same. It was really impactful. What's interesting though is I think there was at least one person, maybe just one person in the group so we all do like a lot of feedback rounds in our own drafts, and that's how we arrive at the draft consensus, who actually said, I don't think this flashback needs to be here. It detracts from the story too much, maybe cut it, which isn't right or wrong, but it's just so interesting that something that to me as well is like one of the best parts of the story, to another person is
was that me? Was I the bad guy?
I don't know. No, I don't. But not even bad guy. I don't know.
I felt like there was almost a division. I feel like half of the people were saying I like it, and I think half the people were saying it's kind of too early in the story, kind of is too long and stuff, which I was like agreed with. But that was one of those things where I was like, technically it might be a better story without it, but then I do really like it, and I'm kind of going to lean into this and try to justify it within the redrafts to make it more just tie it to the story a little bit better.
I can't remember the exact situation, but I feel like I may have been one of the people who prodded you to be like, can this be justified more? Can it be shorter? There's something, pace is not working, ? And I do remember then the next draft of yours I read, I'm like, I have no problem with it anymore. Whatever you've gone in and done, you've fixed it now. I think, as you're saying, you've tied it in more thematically to like his thought process immediately before and after. So it was so smooth going in and out of the flashback. It felt
justified. Oh, that was what it actually was. Yeah, I think that one of your big pieces of advice was to introduce it better and then come out of it better, so it wasn't so sharp, so that the reader knew they were entering into a flashback. Yeah, and then I also thought about, why did I want to justify it, and why did I think it needed to be there, which was the main character's thought process and what this meant to him. So I just made sure to highlight that a little bit better, so it was thematically relevant. And I'm glad I did.
That was one of the best part of the anthologies for me, because I would assume that in professional anthologies, not that we're not professional, but in professional anthologies, there's like an editor and there are writers. And in our anthology, everybody's got both hats. Everybody's editing for everybody, meaning that Ali has read all of the 5 stories and Patty has read all 5 other stories, and we've all given feedback. And we all got feedback from 5 different editors, and it can be overwhelming. I'm not going to lie. especially when you guys disagree with each other. But
And slow, actually. It's been really good. That has taken a long time.
yeah.
Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but
I think it's been worthwhile. Yeah.
me too.
It's given us time to get away from the stories before we've
Yeah.
had to go back and rewrite them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
If
been
we were-
almost a year of editorial.
Yeah.
God, has it?
I think so. And
Yeah, it's
I
been
think,
intense. Yeah.
I think the stories are so much sharper for
Yeah,
it.
they are actually. And if this is going to be our first outing, then it's probably good we start off on the right foot, right?
Yeah.
So we still have a reading coming up. Just really final quick questions before we have this surprise reading for you guys. Would you guys say that this whole process affected you as a writer? Did your writing evolve from having that process of 5 different people giving you feedback at the same time?
It must have. I mean, even if I can't articulate how you can't get that much feedback and do that much thinking about your story and other people's stories without learning things. If nothing else, my punctuation and grammar has improved.
Patty and I in particular went away and we did a punctuation and grammar workshop together.
We did.
Because us plus Phoenix are taking the lead on the very final pass on making
Yes.
sure all the commas and everything's going to be in the right. So we've gone away and really skilled up on that. That's been incredibly valuable.
It has actually.
Exactly, because if one person is reading it, they might miss some stuff. But if 5 people are combing through your story, nothing is safe. Not a comma, not a past tense that is incorrect, not even a weak verb.
I would say that I've never edited at this, I guess, level or at this caliber, because I'd say the last 2 or 3 drafts I looked at, I'd written it as well as I could, and I was coming back to make it better. So I've never edited something that much so that I felt it was out polished. So that was really, really useful to get. You can actually always improve on it.
Yeah.
If you're willing to just suffer through all the time that it takes to edit, which is good.
It's stamina building.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, actually.
I'm glad for being pushed. And I think it is going to give us the confidence that when we put this out into the world, we can feel like we've done everything we possibly could.
You can justify every single sentence.
We've got comments. It's a record for how we
We've
justify
had
it.
3 rounds of 6 people deciding whether or not that sentence needs to be there, and then we've made the decision. Test me on any part of that story.
Yeah.
All right, beautiful. So we've been talking about a story so much, we thought it would be cruel not to let you have a taste. So for the sake of the group, Ali, what have you got for us?
I have volunteered the first page of The Stolen Sword. And I believe this is the first time we're reading anything from our anthologies on the podcast. So that's kind of nice, since the podcast is about the anthology. It's nice that we're tying it back.
Kind of surprising, actually.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we were just saving them at the side.
Maybe.
Or we were too close to it where we're like, oh, we don't need to look at that again.
We've also just done the last draft as well. So
yes. Yeah.
Going to change.
We've submitted. So it would be excellent if I now stumble on something and decide I hate it. So let's see if that
Too late
happens.
now. Yeah. We can't give feedback on this then, basically.
No. Yeah, Matan's like, oh, that sentence is a bit clunky, Ali. Do you want to go back and do that one again? Yeah.
Okay, let's all sign a verbal agreement that we will not be feedbacking this reading, all right? Because enough is enough.
Yeah. No. I love being. Yeah. No. I'm a sucker for feedback. All right. Yes, this shouldn't need an introduction because it's the first page. I have read From Majesty before, but it is fun to be reading Stolen Sword. Ferocity was the name of the sword Cal planned to sell to the Emperor. At 13, he knew how this world worked. As Jarvish born, he had even a sharper sense for a good trade. If he and his brother were to fend for themselves and escape the civil war that had killed their parents, then they needed coin. The large sword strapped to his back was worth a lot of coin. And who could pay more for that weapon than the Emperor himself? If he were smart enough, there was an easy solution to any problem. I don't want it, Giant wailed and tossed his orange wedge into the sands. Somehow the 10-year-old was still crying, despite draining the last drops from their water skin earlier that morning. Cal had yet to refill it on principle. Just eat the fruit before it goes bad, Cal commanded. He gripped his brother's hand and dragged him on, following the road which stretched towards the kingdom of Lexura. In all directions lay sparse, red dirt of the Drabish desert, combed flat by harsh winds. Only a few more days on foot and they would cross the border to a land which promised green rainforests, hot springs, and all the wealth of the empire's capital. But you stole it. That's against the law. That's what's bothering you? Cal shook his head. The beads woven into his dry locks clicked together. You didn't complain when I stole ferocity. Don't you want to eat? That's different, Diane mumbled. Only poor urchins steal food. Cal squeezed his brother's hand. He shared Diane's pride, but admitting to it wouldn't win this argument. We won't be poor urchins once we see the Emperor. I don't like the Emperor. You don't like anyone. Diane did have a point. The military hadn't turned against their family's clan without orders from somebody important. But none of that mattered now. Cal only cared about himself, his brother, and the means by which they'll look after themselves. The Emperor would hand over his fortune in exchange for the sword, and as he did so, Cal would look him straight in the eye and smile. And I'll leave it there.
It's a really good first page.
Yeah, really tight, really awesome.
Yeah, it is really tight.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I guess my later drafts were all about making sure that first page sets up the conflict, it sets up the promise, it sets up the themes, you know.
It's very economic, like it gets a lot of stuff in there. Yeah.
And now if anybody listened to this and you will change something, they will know.
Now they know. They're like, oh, Ali still decided to go back and change that last minute. But no, like, round of applause for the 3 editors here as well. That story had, 3 editors here in the Zoom, also a part of that, offering feedback on how to get it tighter, how to be like, is that sentence justified? This dialogue's dumb. Can you have better dialogue? Like, it was all part of, team effort.
Beautiful. Amazing. Thank you everybody for showing up and sharing these details about how it was to be part of the anthology and the writing process. It's lovely to see you as always. And thank you, Ali, for being the first Precipice to share from the story.
Ooh, yes, no, it's exciting as we leap into audiobook as well. We're already kind of casting and we will be releasing an audiobook version, so they will be read as well.
Beautiful. All right, guys. See you around.
Until next time.
Bye-bye.
You're listening to Prose and Cons, a Precipice Fiction podcast.